Welcome to NDIGO Now. They say music is the universal language. Well, if that's true, the Motown sound personifies how music speaks to our soul, how it spoke to a nation, and how it even bridged a racial gap. Well, today I am privileged to have Mary Wilson, one of the original Supremes, with us today. And we're going to talk about how the Supremes got started and where Mary is today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to go back to day one, before the Supremes were the Supremes. What was the name of the first group?
We were originally called the Primettes, and there were 4 of us.
There were 4 voices.
Yes, because a lot of people think just know us as the 3 since when we became famous. But yes, there were 4 of us. And you know what? A lot of people are not aware of this. We were only 13 years old at the time when we started. 13
young ladies. Yes. Grammar school or high school?
We were actually in the 8th grade on the way to high school because we didn't have that school system. And you know, it was wonderful because we started singing at a school talent show. And I remember I had just seen Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers on some television show, and I fell in love with Herman or Sherman or whichever one it was. And so then the next week, and when I went to school, there was this sign on the gymnasium wall that said, anybody who wants to, sign up for this talent show, sign up. Well, I don't know why I did it, but I signed up because I had not been singing at all. I was in choirs and things of that nature, but not church. But not church and all. Mm-hmm. But I had never really considered singing or whatever. But anyway, they inspired me so much that I went home, got my brother's do-rag, tied it around my head, got a comb, put it in my back pocket, had this little leather jacket on, and I went up there and I pantomimed to Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers' song, I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent. And we're living in the Brewster Projects. So the song was really apropos for that whole thing. But I don't know how I put that in my mind because pantomime, I was up there and I was doing the thing, and all the kids in the gymnasium were saying, go Mary, go Mary, go Mary, And I was having myself a great time, just having a ball. Didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew at that moment that I felt so good. I felt so natural.
You liked it.
And I had never done that. I mean, I was putting on a show and didn't know that's what I was doing, dressing up and doing the whole thing. And afterwards, Florence Ballard was on the same show. And I didn't really know her. She lived in the projects. I had seen her out, really tough kind of girl, really streetwise and all that. And she actually was singing. So I probably killed the sound guy there, but yeah. And so everybody, and she's only 13. She was probably 13 and a half. She was a little older than Diane and I. And so I went over to her, and she came to me, and she said, "My God, you had everybody in the gymnasium just going, go Mary, go Mary." And I said, "And your voice was it's so big and it's so beautiful." And it's like we just started talking, and we walked home together. And we said that if anyone wants to start a group, because in those days people were just, everyone started singing on the street corners and these little things. We said, let's remember each other. We became friends immediately from that day on. And so about 2 weeks later, she ran up to me on the school ground. She said, "Mira, there's this group called the Primes, and their manager is dating my sister, and they want to put a little girl group together, and they asked me if I knew anyone, and I told them about you." And she said, and someone told them about this girl who lives right across the street from you, Diane, and do you want to? I said, I got to ask my mom, because this is kind of real. So we decided to go to the guy's apartment, which our parents would have killed us.
Had they known.
Had they known. But we did, and we went there and we met the 3 Primes. It was Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, and Cal Osborne. And 2 of the guys became 2 members of the Temptations, Eddie and Paul. God. But in those days, they were in this really beautiful group. And they just wanted to do shows and have their own package. So they had the girl group, just to kind of enhance the package. And that's how we started singing. That's when I met Diane, and then the other 4th member was there. She was dating one of the guys as well, so that was the group.
Whatever, dating back then at 13, right?
No, actually she was the one that was a little older because she was a little older. I think she was maybe 17, so that's why she didn't last in the group long, because she was much older than we were.
So how did 4 voices become 3?
Well,
How did
what
we
happened
become?
was we ended up singing with the group of guys around Detroit, doing record hops for the DJs and things like that. And then someone, I don't know, someone says, "Why don't you girls, you know, go and audition?" And that's something that we auditioned at Motown Records. And when we did that, we had to change our name, and then one of the girls left because she got married, and so a lot of things happened during that time. But we were working locally around Detroit.
So how did the name Supremes come about?
When we signed the contract, Mr. Gordy said he didn't like the name, and he didn't like the name Primettes. And so we later found out why he didn't like the name Primettes, because we signed the contract that day, and we had to have a name to sign the contract. And he said he didn't like it, so we need to get a new name, and we couldn't sign the contract until we got the new name. Florence Ballard had collected a lot of names, and she said, "Well, I like this name Supremes." And Diana and I and Barbara said, "Oh God, we don't really like that. It sounds like a building," because back in those days, everything it was denoted by gender. You know, if you were a girl, it was Ets and all L's and whatever. So Supremes just sounded too masculine for us, but we had to have the name in order to sign the contract. On the contract, in small print at the bottom, it said any name that you should get now will belong to Motown.
Wow. Wow.
Read those contracts.
Read the small print, right? That's in any contract.
Print. Get you a lawyer.
What was your dream when you signed that contract? Here you are at this new company, Motown. You're on your way. But what was your dream?
Well, you know, you said in your opening about something that it reminded me that back in those days, the civil rights movement and things, you know, being black, you didn't have a dream as a black person other than being a human being. You wanted to be treated equally. I mean, so today everybody wants to be a star, you know, and back then that wasn't anywhere on our radar at all. We were just having fun.
Was it just a job?
It was, oh, it wasn't a job then. Back then it was still fun. You know, it was definitely fun. But, you know, we didn't have any aspirations in terms of what we wanted to become, because, you know, our parents were saying you really have got to just be a good person, get an education, and so that's what we were after. And just
go to
fun.
school.
Go to school, get the education. Yeah. So, but it was later when we signed with Motown and started recording that we realized, wow, this is something we really think we want to do for the rest of our lives. And the main thing was that when we signed the contract and started recording and traveling and things like that, and we were getting ready to graduate, because we sang for like 3 or 4 years before we became famous, and our parents were saying, okay, now that you're going to graduate from school, you got to go to college. So we were telling Holland Dozier Holland,
the songwriters.
the songwriters. This is Eddie and Brian Holland and Lamont Dozier, and they were, Barry Gordy put us with them. And so we were trying to tell them, we need a hit record, because if we don't get a hit record, we're going to have to go to college.
That's one way to miss it. Give me a hit so I won't go to college. We'll be right back with more of our conversation with Mary Wilson of the Supremes. Welcome back to NDIGO Now. My guest, Mary Wilson, an original member of the Supremes, and we're chatting about what it was like in the beginning, legendary music, and talking about life with the Supremes with an author, a motivational speaker, and a humanitarian. Your first hit, When the Love Light Starts Shining Through His Eyes.
Long title.
Long title. Too long?
Yeah.
What was that like, that very first hit?
Well, you know, we were called the No-Hit Supremes at Motown for a long time because we were the first female group there. However, we were the last female group to get a hit record. And the Martha and the Vandellas got the hit, Marvelettes, Please Mr. Postman. And so, you know, and we were good. And we knew we were good.
Just didn't have that hit
So we didn't
yet.
have the hit. And, you know, eventually that's when Barry put us with the Holland Dozier Holland team. And we got that first hit. Now, it really, for us, it was a hit because it was a bubbling under the top 100, I think they called it, and then it did reach the top 100. So it was, for us, fantastic because we knew we were on our way. So we thought. And then we had a couple other releases that weren't hits. So eventually, Where Did Our Love Go became #1. Mm-hmm. And this was really kind of fun and strange because we were accepted on a Dick Clark tour before that record was released. And I recall that Mr. Clark had wanted Brenda Holloway?
Mm-hmm. Holloway.
Mm-hmm. Who did Every Little Bit Hurts. Mm-hmm. He wanted her on the tour. And so he called Motown and asked, and they said, well, you got to take the Supremes if you want Brenda. And he says, well, I don't know who the Supremes are. And they say, oh, well, they're going to have a hit record pretty soon. And so Dick didn't want to take us, but eventually he did because he wanted Brenda so much. And we went on a tour, and the record became #1 while we were on that tour.
Wow.
And
so that was perfect timing, right?
Just perfect. And so they really, you know, Motown is one of those companies that really had their eye on what they wanted and where they wanted to go. Mm-hmm. You know, it was their, Mr. Berry Gordy's sort of vision. And when we fell into all of that as well, because now we knew this is what we were going to do for the rest of our lives.
It was business with him, and he was the focused business guy, taking care of business.
Oh, totally.
You all brought something to the stage. You brought glamour. You brought beauty. You brought style. You brought fashion. And I understand there was a training ground in Motown.
Yes.
But tell us about what that was like.
The beautiful part about it is that Mrs. Powell, who was one of our mentors there at Motown, and she was in the Department of Artist Development, was from Chicago because she only just passed a couple of months ago. But she really was from Chicago. And when she came to Motown, she brought that idea of glamour and things of that nature to Berry Gordy's sort of eyesight, in saying that, you know, we have some great artists here, but they need a little grooming. And this is what Mrs. Powell and Mr. Charlie Atkins, who was the choreographer, who did all of the choreography for the Four Tops attempts and Supremes, Martha and Vandellas, Gladys Knight and Pips. So together, they were the ones responsible for this packaging of how groups looked. But I gotta say, give a credit to the groups themselves, especially the Supremes, and that is that we did come there with something. You know, we weren't just made into these glamour icons. We brought something there, and you know, Mr. Gordy and the people there were smart enough to see it. The one thing Mrs. Powell said that inspired me so much, and to this day as well, she said, you know, you girls are diamonds in the rough, and we're just here to polish you. Well, that's a very beautiful thing to say to a young person, because it gives them their own sort of, you know, how they look at themselves, and I see a lot of that's lacking out there today. And I don't get me wrong, I'm not putting I think these kids today have really picked up on a lot of things that came before them, but because they didn't get a certain amount of background information, you know, a lot of people are puffed up. So it's okay to have this knowledge and to be groomed, but when you do that wood shedding that we had at Motown, it brings out the best in you.
But it shows, because if all the Motown groups, you can go through all the Motown groups, you see the polish, you see the style, and you can see it was trained, whereas now you see a little bit of it over here, none of it over there, and what is that over there?
Yeah, because I mean, I believe that you come here with a certain something. You know, and people should be given that. Young people should be given that, you know. But then you need to embellish upon it, and this is what Motown does. And that's what I see is lacking. They might, because you can buy certain things and you can look good and you can do all these things because money can buy a lot of things. But if you don't have it inside, then eventually it's going to start showing. It'll come out. So I'm very happy that Motown had the foresight to do that, and that Mrs. Powell had the, you know, and I have a gown collection of the Supremes gowns.
I was going to ask you about that. Just on exhibit in London? It was in Great Britain for about 3 years. It opened up at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And these gowns are all the gowns that we wore on the Ed Sullivan Show, the Dean Martin, the Flip Wilson, Sonny and Cher. We wore these things all over the world. And I was fortunate enough to end up with them because I was the last person in the Supremes. So, but you kept the gowns. You didn't toss them away.
No, but some of them are still missing, and I've got to look into that. They're mysteriously gone, but we'll find those. But anyway, those gowns and a lot of other memorabilia are on tour, and it's really great because it's amazing how people really. They love it. Men and women love it. So that was part of the glamour. The part of the glamour was wearing, you know, these wonderful gowns, and it just made you feel very special. But you also we had something inside, and I'm very happy to say, that, as you mentioned, that if you see a lot of groups, you can always pick out the Motown groups. You can pick them out because there's something that we got. And I got to bring something else up that I
can we bring it up when we come right back?
Yeah,
we'll
sure.
be right
You're gonna come back though, right?
We're coming right back.
Okay.
When we look at the contributions singers like Mary Wilson made to the music industry in America, it makes you wonder, what's the legacy of today? What's the legacy of the musicians today? So we'll talk about the future for Mary and talk about her wisdom and inspiring music right after this break. We'll be right back.
Go to www.indigo.com to read our latest edition. Like us on Facebook, tweet us your show ideas, and check your local TV listings for NDIGO Now.
Welcome back to NDIGO Now. I'm talking to Mary Wilson, a legend in the music industry, an original member of the Supremes. Before the break, we were talking about, well, we didn't get to it, but I wanted to ask you, what was the Supremes like when Diana Ross left, when she went out for solo? How'd you feel about that?
When the Supremes, well, you know what, first of all, we have to say when Florence left. Florence was the first member who left the Supremes, and once Florence left, the group was never the same. Because Florence really was the heart and the soul of the Supremes. She really was.
Okay.
And I mean that from not the performing perspective, but more of who she was as a human being. She kind of like was the person that started the group, you know, so it was really
Kind
her
of
thing.
kept you.
And for me, I leaned on her a lot because her vocal power was so tremendous. And if anyone who is a Supreme fan will listen to the background, you know, Florence was soloing in the background, you know, and Diana had our, you know, our wonderful out front voice, but Flo had that other something down here. If she laughed, everybody in the room laughed, you know. But anyway, when she left, for me, the group ended. And at the same time, we knew that Diane was going to leave as well. So for me, the whole thing just fell apart. And I had never really thought about what I would do if it ever happened. I thought we'd go on forever, you know. So when all this was coming back, life was like, whoa, what's going on? Hey, life, look at me. I can see the reality. Because when you shook me, took me out of my world, I woke up. It was like, you know, the light went off, and I'm like, this is real life here.
Here
Things
it is.
were happening, and I wasn't really prepared for it. So, you know, and then of course Flo left and Diane was leaving. I found myself all of a sudden trying to figure out, whoa, what, you know, as a young woman, my life is falling apart. What do I do?
Next steps for Mary.
And so, but the beautiful part, you know, I've been spared, I'm here, and I realized, well, I really love what I do. So just because, I mean, I dare to dream all the time. That's what I call my lectures, Dare to Dream. And when I realized this, I said, well, just because other people's dreams changed or stopped or whatever it did, doesn't mean that mine has to. I've got to figure out what I want to do. I'm a performer. I love to perform. I don't have the greatest voice. I'll be the first person to tell you. Flo and Diane were the ones with the voices. I had the other, whatever it was. And so, but I realized that I am a performer. I'm a great performer. I love to do that. And so I'm not going to stop. And that's when I realized I had to find my own chops and my own way of still doing it. And when they left, that's what I started doing, preparing myself for what I'm doing
Mary's
now.
next steps.
Yeah, this has been like almost 54 years now. I'm 69 and a half, and so I'm like saying,
going on 30.
Going on 15. I'm still 15. Sorry about that. In my mind, I'm still 15. But, you know, I realized that I would have to find my own way now and by myself. I really loved Diane and Flo so much. Still do. But not a day goes by that I don't think about the two of them. But, you know, you got to think about yourself. And you got to figure out what it is that God gave you that you can, you know, live and enjoy your life. And so that's what I did at that point.
How did you feel, what was your reaction to Dreamgirls, to some of the depictions that have been done on the Supreme? Because, I mean, you all are so classic, so now they're doing movies, they're doing plays. What did you think about that?
You mentioned the gowns before, and it was amazing because I was on an airplane and I was looking at a People magazine, and I saw these red fringe gowns, skirts, because they were short. And I'm like, oh, what is our picture doing in People? This is like when Dreamgirls came out. You know, I'm like, this is old. We wore these gowns in 1964, and in London as well. And so I'm looking at them, and I was like, that's not us. Those are our gowns, but it's not us. And then I saw it was about Dreamgirls. They use our pictures of our gowns. They use our likeness in everything. And so in the show that I do, I know people think that Dreamgirl, the movie, the play, are all about the Supremes, but they're not, because I didn't get paid. So I know they're not about that.
Now you didn't get no royalty checks.
But I tell you, my friend called me one time, and I'll try to keep this short, but he called me, and I was living in Hollywood at the time, and he says, Mary, you have got to come to Broadway, because there's this new movie, this play out, it's about the Supremes, and I'm like, it's about the Supremes, and nobody's called me. So, you know,
that was the Jennifer Holliday.
That was the play, the actual
first one.
Broadway play. And you know, I went there and I saw it, and it was great. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, here we are on the Great White Way, you know, me, Flo, and Diana. Our lives are there. So they actually did use all of our information, all of our history, our legacy, and created this story, but it was closer to the real story than anything.
Wow.
Now, I've written 2 books. My first book, Dream Girl, My Life as a Supreme, it was a bestseller. And it's the real story. But it's so much like the play and whatever. If I ever wanted to make a movie of it, I couldn't because people said, well, it's already been done.
Dreamgirls did it already.
It's kind of like plagiarism, in a way,
of your own story.
But it's good in a way because there's a whole slew of the new generation who's learning about us, and they're learning from this, and it's pretty close, even though it's not true, still close. So it has brought back a certain interest in the Supremes, even though it's not about us, really.
You have a lecture series that you tour around the country.
Yes.
Dare to Dream.
World.
Around the world.
I was appointed by Colin Powell as an ambassador, and so I take that lecture around the world. And as you said, it's called Dare to Dream, and basically it's just based on my life.
But you've got a message for young people. What are you saying in Dare to Dream?
Well, you know what, no matter how old you are, I mean, I've had to start all over many, many times, and each time you've got to dare to dream. You've got to get out of that comfort zone. When Flo and Diane left, I had to dare to dream again to find out who I am.
You had to start all over.
Start all over, and then when I got married, I had to dare to dream again. I was in an abusive marriage, and I had to find a way to get out to save myself. So whenever life gives you these moments, you do have to dare to dream because you got to find a new place to go to. You can't stay in that same place, and that's what my lecture is all about. But it's based on my life with the Supremes. Everything is based on that.
Let me ask you a woman's question.
My second book is a great answer to all the women questions. It's called Supreme Faith, Someday We'll Be Together, and it is real. It's like, what happens when the dream dies?
When the dream,
what do the women?
Dream dies, man gone. What do I do?
Gone, yes,
so
as
a woman, we have this balanced life. You've been on the road, you've been married, career changes, not your doing, but change. How do you balance all of that?
Well, you gotta love what you
raised the family. You're now raising your grandchildren.
Well, I'm kind of
some of them. How do you're back on the road? You're back on stage.
I've never left the road.
How do you mix it all? How do you balance it all?
You have to love yourself. If you love yourself, you're gonna keep moving. No
matter what.
No matter, yeah. I think it's all about that. When my son died, that was the second worst thing for me because first it was Flo, when Flo died. And then my son died. I had to find a way to still be happy and enjoy myself. And I realized that, well, you know what? A hole has been put, several holes have been put in my heart. But I still am a happy person. And so if I'm a happy person, then I've got to go on to be happy. The balance in life for me is to love what you do. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being supreme. But most of all, thank you for being a supreme woman. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
Go to www.indigo.com to read our latest edition. Like us on Facebook, tweet us your show ideas, and check your local TV listings for NDIGO Now.